A new graphic novel biography, yeah, you heard me right, novel biography is sharing a largely untold story of one of George Washington's most important generals from the Revolutionary War. The story shares the queer side of Baron von Steuben's life. Washington's Gay General was written by Josh Tro and illustrated by Levi Hastings. And Levi joins me now. Thanks for being here.
Thank you for having me. Good morning.
Okay, first of all, let's talk about who Baron von Steuben was.
Yeah, Baron von Steuben was a Prussian general. He was a brilliant military tactician, and he trained under Frederick the Great in the 7 Years' War. He fell on hard times and was sort of aimlessly wandering around Europe, fleeing, essentially fleeing persecution for being gay, because at the time it was illegal, right? So at the time, the American Revolution was in a pretty bad situation. George Washington needed somebody to essentially train the troops, because the Continental Army was largely, farmers, craftspeople. They were not trained. They were not a trained military.
Right.
And so von Steuben, needing a place to go, was lured over to America, where he trained the troops at Valley Forge and essentially created the American military. He literally wrote the book on how to create a military that could, combat. At the time, the British Army was the largest, most powerful military in the world.
So typically, Baron von Steuben would be kind of a footnote in our history books, but it is really important, especially when reclaiming queer history, right? Why do you think that matters so much?
Well, I think it matters because it sort of recontextualizes American history for us, right? We grow up on this mythology about what the founding of America was like, and as we're learning, particularly in the last few years, there's a lot about American history, and particularly the founding of America, that is sort of lost to time, and there are certain details that get erased or get distorted. And for us, I think, for queer people in general, I think it's really important for us to see ourselves in history and to be able to identify figures in the past so that we can sort of contextualize it for ourselves, and it just helps us kind of move forward with the challenges that we're facing today. 1000%.
All right, tell us about the book and how you use comics as a medium, because these are complex stories.
Yeah.
These are difficult stories, but all of the things on this book blow my mind. It's a novel, it's a biography, and it's a graphic novel. So tell us about it.
Well, yeah, so my collaborator, Josh Tro, he's a brilliant writer. He lives in LA, and we bonded on our shared love of American history and obviously queer history. And this story came to us, and we were just really fascinated by the character of von Steuben, because he led this incredibly fabulous life, full of scandal and drama and intrigue. And we found there was so much richness to it, and with our shared history in comics, there's so much to the medium of comics that allows you to tell a really complex and interesting story and condense a lot of complicated feelings in a very short amount of time. And you can convey concepts in a visual way that are so much more difficult to convey in words. And we were also in telling his story, we're kind of wrestling with what it means for us. Why do we care in this day and age? Why should we care about this man who is 300 years old at this point? And so we wrestle with a lot of that in the book ourselves, and the way that our own histories have been erased, both personally and in a more kind of recent historical context. Why it's important for us to, reclaim our history, know where we come from, and document it. Because
speaking of history, not to interrupt you, but speaking of history, how did you go about researching this untold life? I mean, where do you get this information? Are there journals, or is there? I feel like, it's like national treasure trying to find things.
A little bit, yeah, and especially because Josh and I are both based on the West Coast, right? And so we're thousands of miles away from any of these battlefields or where all of these things happened. Josh did an amazing job doing research. He scoured biographies, and there's dozens of military biographies of him. All of which they have all of these clues, and a lot of the original biographies of him were written by the men who were his companions. And so so Josh was able to find a lot of sort of primary sources or secondary sources.
Really? That's so fascinating.
Yeah, and for my part, I was doing a lot of visual research on simply, the the uniforms,
Yeah.
the clothing, the wigs, the hats. Like for me, that was a lot of fun.
And very important and historically accurate.
As much as I could be. I'm sure I messed up some Prussian uniforms are probably not fully accurate. But I did my best.
So how do you see von Steuben's story relating to the American dream?
I think it really maps onto a lot of, he kind of ran up against some of the limitations, right? He came over on the promise of a better life, right? Like so many people,
Yeah.
and he faced a lot of discrimination as an immigrant, which has always been an issue in American history,
Yeah.
right? Even at the time, he was barred from getting certain positions, certain jobs he was incredibly qualified for, even after the war.
Really?
Simply because he was an immigrant, and Congress did not trust giving an immigrant, say, Secretary of War in the new country. And after the Revolutionary War, there were major issues with Congress not paying the troops, right? So there were troops who went unpaid for years after the war, even though they were promised.
The book talks about this?
Yes, including him. And so he fought tirelessly after the war to make sure that the men were paid, even though he himself went unpaid for many, many years after the war.
Incredible.
Yeah, so.
What a great story. So reclaiming a history, learning about history, what a deep dive this is, and what a fun read. Thank you so much. It's
Thank
been
you for
a pleasure
having me.
chatting with you.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
delightful.
And just a reminder, Levi is holding an author event Wednesday, the 27th at 7 p.m. at the Elliott Bay Book Company on Seattle's Capitol Hill. Go check it out.